Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this seminar looking at double jeopardy and issue around age and ethnicity. If you were thinking this was about double jeopardy in terms of Hollywood movie or critique on films, you come to the wrong seminar. This is more exploring issues of ethnicity and aging, and we've got some fantastic speakers to explore this issue. Just like to welcome you. I'm Patrick Vernon, Associate Director for Connected Communities at Centre for Aging Better. And with me this morning, I've got Elaine Yabui from Manchester, who's involved in various forums around older people in the Greater Manchester area, and Vanda Kopowski, who is the Director of the Equality Trust and also a board member of NCVO. Before we start, I just want to do some housekeeping rules, as always, on these various platforms, do with Zoom. This is going to go live on our Aging Better YouTube channel, and the webinar will be available on demand after this event. All live attendees who listen on listen-only mode, you can have the opportunity to raise questions in the Q&A box for us, and we're limited in time, so we'll select a number of questions around that. But also you can use a chat box if you want to share your own comments and perspectives as well. I know there's going to be lots of questions around this topic around aging and ethnicity, and it's really exciting that the centre is hosting this today. Just to give you a little bit of context why we're doing this, as you know, COVID-19 has had a traumatic impact in Britain, but particularly on the lives of BME communities in Britain, and it has exposed the disproportionalities and inequalities in society. So the whole issue around aging is now a key issue in that context. And as you were, obviously, in terms of Black Lives Matter, the movement, this has now galvanized a national conversation around race and identity, and race is on the agenda. So this has been a fantastic opportunity to really explore this as well. In terms of the work of the Centre for Aging Better, we have lots of things that we do as an organisation, but one of the key drivers is about shifting negative attitudes towards aging and the whole demographic shift as the population of Britain gets older and living longer. But also we recognise that certain communities are being left behind in this demographic and economic shift at the same time. And as a work centre, we are doing lots of research work to analyse the impact of COVID-19, to analyse the impact of inequalities in Britain. And we will be producing a series of reports and research findings next year in particular. And I've got some slides that I'll probably share as part of this, as part of my presentation, to give an indication where we are going as well. We recognise that the issues around age, ethnicity, and the intersectionality around gender, faith, is actually a big area, and more nuanced work is required around this. So we hope this is going to be the start of a dialogue and a conversation today and beyond in terms of looking at some of these key issues and drivers. I'm going to ask my speakers to speak up to 10 minutes to give their perspective on the issues around age and ethnicity from their perspective and their lived experiences as well. So I'd first like to invite Vanda, who I've worked with on various projects over the years. She is one of the few Black women chief execs of a national charity, and she has a real perspective around the whole lens around inequality and gender. So I'd just like to invite Vanda to say her perspective on this issue.
Thanks, Patrick. That's a really warm welcome. I just want to correct one thing, that I'm not on a board of NCVO. I think Carl would have a bit of a shock, but AKIVO, the Association of Chief Executives of Voluntary Organisations. But thank you for that warm welcome. I always enjoy working with Patrick, so if he invites me to something, it's a 110% yes. But thank you everyone for gathering today. I'm going to focus on the sort of bigger picture in a sense, because I think you'll all, with your varied experience, be able to place your various interests and the shape of the debate within what I'm about to say. So we know that in countries with high levels of income inequality, so huge gaps between those who are earning a lot and those who aren't, we know that we have higher levels of physical and mental ill health. We know that we have higher levels of drug and alcohol addiction. We have higher levels of teenage pregnancy, of obesity, we have higher levels of violent crime and incarceration, and we have lower levels of social mobility, of trust, and lower levels of educational attainment. Now, I don't need to tell any of you here that those are all areas that are of concern for our Black and Asian populations and communities. So, in essence, if we can reduce income inequality, we can have an impact on all of those areas. And that's why the Equality Trust campaigns to reduce inequality. And it's not just those at the sharp end of inequality. It's not just, we know the social determinants of health. We know that the lower down the income stream you are, the more likely you are to suffer from the social determinants of health and comorbidities. And we've seen all of this laid bare in COVID. But it also means that society is better for everybody, because inequality affects us all, not just the poor, not just those in the middle, but also those at the top. So we would all be living in a much better society if we reduced inequality. So I'm going to take you back to the 80s. Inequality became very high, and it has remained stubbornly high. And this has contributed over the years to a real hollowing out of people's physical capital, of assets, of housing, etc., but also of their incomes. Because if you take a family that was doing relatively well in the 80s, and you look at those generations, they have less and less to pass on to the next generation. And so we see people progressively becoming poorer. We see the situation of the housing market and the housing and social housing in particular becoming really, really strained. A lot of this obviously due to policy choices that were made. So this has contributed to, on the one hand, an accumulation of capital and assets by those who can afford it, but an absolute hollowing out of that middle. And we've seen this in terms of wealth. We see the impacts on education, where we have these huge educational differences. We've seen that again over the summer, where children in private schools were able to access more or less the whole school day from sort of 8:30 till 4 or 6 o'clock, and where many of our young people didn't have access to a laptop or technology, and some of them dropped out of school altogether. So we can see these impacts on health. And the reason that I'm talking about this is because we know that Black and Asian populations are disproportionately represented in those lower incomes, in those gig economy jobs, in mental health services, and in those socially determined areas that we've talked about. So this is a real issue because it's been happening since the 80s. And that means that we are coming into a generation of people getting older, people my age, I'm approaching 50, but becoming older, that are going to be coming into a further situation of dire straits. And this is compounded by the income inequality. And the reason that I say that is because we know that pensions, an important part of income in older age, are obviously related very much to our income. So if we take that generation and my generation from the 80s, and we see that the situation has got worse, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to predict that we've got an ongoing problem that's just about to hit us as well, because pensions are a deferred part of your income. And that also makes us think about the situation that people are in now, with so many people in the gig economy, so many people that don't have access to pensions, who aren't saving. We're setting up a problem not just for my generation, but for the generations that are coming afterwards. And that's what makes it really important to look at the situation of what's happening now and see how we can change that, how we can listen to people like Elaine, listen to people who are campaigning and say, we know this is coming, so what can we do now to change this? So another important aspect, I think, is that, for some people, a pension is a luxury other than the state pension. So there are so many older people, a much bigger proportion of older people now, who are still working and who may be in part-time jobs or who may be in the gig economy. And of course, as Paul Johnson has said at the IFS, we're about to hit the recession to end all recessions. So we're also about to see people potentially losing their jobs, being furloughed as well at an older age. And we know that in terms of pensions, that women in particular have not accrued higher pensions because of one thing, obviously the gender pay gap, and obviously the ethnicity pay gap. So as Black women, we are doubly penalised. There's a disability pay gap, of course. There's a pay gap according to geography and also what industry you're in and whether you're a part-time worker or not. And again, this is where we find a lot of our Black and Asian communities in lower paid jobs, in part-time work, but also a lot of us in self-employment. And again, that's not necessarily an area where people are going to build up a big pension. So the labour market and the discrimination in the labour market is reflected in our pensions, but it will also become more apparent as it's reflected in the conditions we live in our older age. So the health inequalities I mentioned before are hugely linked to income. And so we see more comorbidities, we see poorer housing, we see poorer access to green space, and a whole range of issues that are compounded within communities. And the effect on mental health and physical health, there is research on that, we know that, and we need to look at the wider picture of how we can reduce these inequalities before we start to really tackle those issues. I think one of the complexities of this is that, first of all, we have to get political will to acknowledge that inequality is an issue and to start tackling it. And actually, the government has signed up, as most countries in the world have signed up to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Development Goal number 10 is reducing inequalities. I think one of the problems in the sector is that we are very much working in silos. So we're working on race, we may be working on mental health, we may be working on age, bringing these things together and talking about intersectionality, being aware that we need to look at everybody's experience, and also bringing class into this, I think is absolutely essential. And one of the things I would just end on, I suppose, is that a positive note, and that is that there is something in the Equality Act which wasn't brought into being, called the Socio-Economic Duty. This is Section 1 of the Equality Act. And we've been campaigning along with Just There to have this enacted. Now, because it was 2010, the Labour government brought the Equality Act to Parliament. We had the election, and then there was a coalition government. And the coalition government brought the Equality Act into being in Parliament. However, there were several clauses that were not enacted. One is a socio-economic duty. And this is really, really essential to tackling all of the issues that we're talking about today. And this says that every public body has to pay due regard to the effects of its policies on increasing inequality, and the effects of its policies on those who are socio and economically disadvantaged. Of course, this includes hospitals, schools, a range of public bodies, and local councils. So in effect, it's a sort of equality impact assessment for policies made by public bodies. And you can see the implications of this and how important this would be if we could have it enacted. Incidentally, another part of the Equality Act, which was not enacted, was the ability to claim discrimination on multiple grounds, i.e. that of being a woman and that of being Black, or that of race and gender, for example, which again, would have an effect if that was brought in. So Scotland has brought this duty in over a year ago. Wales is looking to bring it in soon. And so we are really campaigning to say that we need to bring this in, and that this would have a transformative effect on thousands of people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Wanda. As always, very precise and insightful in terms of the evidence and the lived experiences. I'd like to invite Elaine, who is in many ways embodies active age living. She is involved in the Age Friendly Board in Greater Manchester. She's also involved in the Older People's Network in Manchester. And it's a real privilege that she's here today to give her perspective. So over to you, Elaine.
Can I say, hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Elaine, go ahead.
Thank you, okay. Can I say what a pleasure it is to be invited to speak here today. And Patrick, thank you so much for that kind introduction. COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter has shone a light on the inequalities faced by the Black communities and exposed the issues of systemic and institutional racism. As an older Black woman, I can tell you that inequalities are nothing new and has always been there. Tragically, it has taken the impact of a terrible disease, public killings of Black people, along with scandals such as the Windrush generations, to bring these issues back into the spotlight. I welcome this decision. This has brought, as long as it brings positive and meaningful change and does not become another rhetoric. It is clear as you get older, not just your age, but discrimination about your race and gender can add layers of disadvantage in later life. I want to touch on circumstances which may help explain how people's lives may have been shaped by discrimination and prejudices. Arriving in the UK, the probability is that you live with people from your own cultural background in close-knit and sometimes isolated communities as a result of exclusion. It is where you felt safe, sought solace, and protection. Forms of discrimination can create a deeper experience of inequality, having a big impact on where you can go, who you can trust, and being safe was a big consideration in all things. The church played an important role. When unfair treatment was questioned, you were either disregarded, dismissed, or told you are too sensitive. Issues were rarely addressed. Healthcare was generally sought mostly when conditions worsened. The perception is that when you go to the hospital, you come up against hostility, being stereotyped, ignored, and not listened to. My mother worked for several years as a cook in a hospital, and the advice that she gave family and friends was not to go to the hospital because you either came out dead or maimed. Perceptions shaped by experiences are just as harmful. So what does it mean for older BME people on the COVID-19? They experience risks and disadvantages because of their age, struggle with people in the communities dying, and higher numbers than in their white communities, and occurrences of a lifetime and institutional racism means that they mistrust authorities. A study commissioned by MPs and peers on a joint human rights found that 2/3 of Black people believes that the NHS gives white people better care. The media is incredibly ageist, and the negative narratives, which has a double impact in terms of both ageism and racism. Genuine change is needed. Response needs to be dramatic to correct the structural and systemic injustices. For decades, the system have left things undone that should have been done. I believe organizational standards need to be developed, demonstrating cultural competencies with age-friendly lens incorporated. Interventions must involve the community in order to develop solutions. It has to be about joint actions. Monitoring systems must tell the whole story. My first experience of ethnic monitoring was as a member of the Community Health Council. I witnessed white staff recording ethnicity based on whether they think someone looked Black or not. Representation of the Black community should be at all levels. It is only through action, honesty, transparency that we will be able to build the trust needed to overturn the double jeopardy and the lifetime of cumulative inequalities of age and ethnicity. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Elaine. Thanks for that powerful, impassionate plea based on experiences. What I'm going to do now is show a couple of slides of some of our initial research work that we are doing at the Centre for Aging Better, and then we'll have sort of Q&A with our panelists. So please feel free to put questions in the Q&A chat box if you've got any questions for any of our panelists. So I'm just going to share my screen now. If I'm allowed, come on. Okay, so these are a couple of slides that based on some of our initial work that we've been doing at the centre, looking at inequalities approaching later life. So this is a survey. This was actually not done by us, but the Active Life Survey, and it gives sort of the population differences in ethnicity around levels of physical activity. And as you can see from these slides, as you get older, there's less activity, physical activity, and that's one of our key kind of driving programs under our Healthy Aging program, to encourage more people to be physically active, to go to leisure centres, but also active travel around walking and cycling. This slide is really about inequalities that exist across various life ages, and the main piece of our work as an organisation is between the ages of 50 to 69. We believe that if you get it right for that age cohort, it means as you get older, it means there'll be less impact on health, social care, etc. So again, if you look at, and I know that there's a whole debate about the word BAME, but if you can bear with us on this, on these slides, because obviously we need to unpack what is the different diversity and life experiences of different communities. So if you compare stuff around physical inactivity, social isolation, and basically attacks, physical attacks in the public highway, you can see again in terms of Black and non-Muslim communities, more likely to be physically inactive, more likely to be socially isolated as well. And obviously these are generalizations that we need to drill down much more. This one is around this is one around finance and work and security. In many ways, this speaks to what Vanda was saying regarding the work of the Equality Trust. And as you can see, if you look at health limits at work, renting, not able to manage your finances, and increased household costs, there's a clear disproportionality again around Black, Asian, Muslim communities, around the lack of finances and issues on job security and income, and particularly wealth as well. And then again, this is another slide to do with income. And as you can see, this is actually a report that we are working on, and something that we're working with a number of research bodies, IPPR and IPS, Institute of Physical Studies. And you can see again, if you look at the average income levels, again, you can see that particularly Black and other BAME communities are earning less than the norm, which is just about £499 on average in weekly income as well. And obviously, if you were to break that down in terms of gender, then that would be more of a nuance regarding that. And then this slide is around social isolation, which is a big issue. So, as you know, the government and various initiatives around Joe Cox, there's a national strategy around loneliness and social isolation. But the question is, does the experiences of being in communities reflected in the work around social isolation? This slide highlights that if you're an Asian female and a black male, you are more likely to be socially isolated as well compared to the white population. So this is a real area, and I think the impact of COVID-19 is going to have a great impact on this. And this piece of work that I've slide was showing you is part of a bigger piece of work that we are doing, and we're going to have more detailed analysis next year regarding that. So I'll just finish stopping my slides. And what we're going to do, we're going to go straight into Q&A. So we've already got a number of preset questions that was already sent to us in advance by a number of people, which is really fantastic. And I'm going to share those questions now. And also, I think we've already got a couple of questions already in the chat box. So let me just pull up some of the questions that's been given to us already in advance. And the first question I'd like to share with both to Elaine and to Vanda is there's two questions were raised regarding black women about do black women age differently compared to white women, and what's the key and what advice would you give around aging better if you're a black woman? So I'll let you start first, Elaine, because it looks like maybe you've got the answer there, or maybe it's Aruba. I don't know. You tell me.
Black women aging differently. I feel that we do age differently because of the different pressures that we have. Number one, as it has shown economically, we have less income. So therefore, a lot of black women put in longer hours to be able to look after their family. Another thing is, if you have to put the hours in, you cannot engage in anything leisurely, and therefore this puts more stress on you, stress that you don't know it's there, but it comes out later on in life, Thirdly, your experiences, nowadays they are more covert than extrovert. So your experiences, make sure, and this has been continuous over the age. So therefore, it says that we are more isolated. This is one of the things that happens. And if you're more isolated, don't forget as you get older, if you're more isolated, you have lack of exercise. And as you get older, you have comorbidities. This would affect us more. So you see, the negatives are stacked up on us. But that notwithstanding, we still have to take things into consideration. As you get old, these things have happened. You could start, but I'm appealing to the younger women, the middle-aged women, to start doing something about this. It is very necessary. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. And what about you, Vanda? What's your perspective?
Well, I think there are a number of things, aren't there? It's the environment that we live in, that we've been brought up in. It's the things that we've unconsciously had to fight from a very early age. I grew up in the Northwest in the 70s and 80s, where there were very, very few Black people. And that, discrimination, the things you go through at school, the bullying, all of these things, all have an effect on how you live your life, how you, on your mental health from a very early age. I mean, we know from research that bullying has a huge effect on your income and your ability to earn later on in life, but also on your mental health far longer than just through school days. I think there are issues for Black women, or there certainly were in my time, around sport. We tend to develop earlier. And so there's that shyness around sport, having to, get changed, having to, not wanting to do that. And I have to say myself, it was only much later in life that I went back to the gym and actually really, really started to enjoy working out and some sport there. I think there's also a huge issue about us not actually knowing what diseases and what issues we can face genetically. I didn't discover until much later in life that Black women are far more likely to have fibroids, to have particular issues. We know more, obviously, now about high blood pressure and heart disease. But there are lots of things there that you just don't know that you're going to be more susceptible to. So I think work on that would be really, really good as well. But I think Elaine's point about leisure and well-being and downtime, we know that obviously there are different patterns of family relationships, which do see a lot of Black women as mothers taking on a much higher burden than they might do otherwise. And that doesn't give us that time for leisure, for well-being, to get into that flow. I was admiring a piece of embroidery behind Elaine, and I very much now in my stage of life am able to really get that downtime through being able to do crafts. I love doing crafts, a whole range of that, but very rarely when I go to huge craft events do I see many Black people there. And yet we know that women are sewing, women are making, women are doing these things previously as a necessity, but are we actually investing that time in ourselves so that we can flourish and have that time, which is absolutely vital for our own mental health? I think we're too busy taking care of everybody else and not taking care of ourselves enough.
Okay, thanks. That question was from Monica Brown, so thank you, Monica. Second question is actually from Jerry McDurdle, and actually there's two questions from Jerry that you've sent, one online now and one previously, but I'm going to slip the one that you've sent to us now online. And this, if you could answer this one first, Wanda, because I think it builds on what you've just been talking about, is how can we effectively mitigate the effects of biological weathering due to race and discrimination at an individual, community and society level? Sounds like an essay, but see what you can do with that.
If I had the answer to that, I'd be wearing a cape and I'd be flying through the air. It's actually really sad, isn't it, that we have to have this conversation about how we mitigate the society around us. And I think, that's something that I will take a lot into my work, that expression of we have to sit here and mitigate the society around us. I think different people are inspired and motivated by different things. For me, it's about going home at night and realizing that I've tried to do my best in the daytime in the work that I do, and that I'm using the small amount of sort of platform and privilege that I have to raise these issues. I think it has to start from the self. It has to start about thinking, how do we protect ourselves and look after ourselves? And then we start to think about how we can change the wider society. And I think everybody has a different way of doing it. Some people are really up for that. Some people want to, campaign and join groups and spread the word. Other people are really too busy trying to live their lives and trying to save themselves and mitigate society for themselves and navigate society, because the amount of mental health that we lose just through having to code switch in the way we talk, think about how we're going to wear our hair, or all of these things, a whole range of things of how we navigate a dominant white space, really, really takes its toll. And I'm a great believer in the power of therapy, of looking at mental health, of preserving our mental health. But one of the things I would say, and I think this is a really interesting debate, particularly for this session, is that we have very much based therapy on an understanding of our parents and our childhood and how we've grown up and our material situation. And we are beginning to see now therapists looking at the environment, society, the effect that society is having on us, not just, the sins of the fathers, so to speak. And I think that's an absolute breakthrough, because unless we start to do that, then, there's really no point in really just looking at a very narrow basis.
Yeah, that's quite a good point. Maybe we should start reading Frantz Fanon again.
There's never a bad time to read Frantz Fanon.
Frantz Fanon, for those who don't know, he was from Martinique, and not far from the river, actually, Martinique, and he was involved in the Algerian War, was a psychiatrist, and did two major books, Wretched of the Earth, Black Skins, White Masks, which is really a ground, still a revolutionary way of looking at mental health, politics and identity. Elaine, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Well, I just have to say, how do we mitigate society? The first thing is that I feel when you come into a place, if you go anywhere else, it's the welcome they give you. It's not you to mitigate. But we have got to try to be strong because the constant barrages that we are facing, we have got to have strength ourselves before we can now have to start to mitigate the society around us. We've got to be strong.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting one. I was going to ask a question, but I think we might slightly veer off in terms of the whole notion of what is strong, particularly with particularly people of colour. But this question is from Des Prado, and he's got a couple of questions that he sent in advance, but and also he's put some stuff in the chat room about the Socio-Economic Duty. But the question I want to pose, I'll start with you first, Elaine, is can white privilege mindset change in older generations? Now, this is quite an interesting one. Sadly, I collect postcards. I've got a massive postcard collection of postcards from 1870 up to the First World War. And if you look at the postcards, how Black and Asian people are depicted, it's kind of has these stereotypes, which obviously regenerate themselves over the last several decades. So, so Elaine, what do you think about this? Can you change the mindset of older people? I mean, you're working in Manchester, you're involved in age-friendly networks. How are you engaging with older white people in your conversations and trying to have that inclusiveness around aging?
You know, when you're set in your ways, it is like chipping a block off all the time. But it can be done. You know, it can be done because when you say the old pictures and things like that, who printed the newspapers? Who put all those things out? If we had done it ourselves, the pictures might have been different, you know? Yeah. So those stereotypes are there, and it is very difficult to get rid of. But by constant talking, constant having dialogues, you can more or less try and shift the minds. But something that you've grown up with all your lives, that you thought was true, that you see all the negativity that was told about you. But I believe with dialogue and constant dialogue, that's the only way. But shifting all, I don't know if we'll achieve that, but we can shift some.
Okay then. Wanda, I mean, white privilege, what's your take on that? There's lots of conversations since post Black Lives Matter, allyship. We will need to understand how that works in the context from the work that you're doing and in terms of the whole stuff around aging.
Well, I think it's really interesting because it's opened up such a huge debate, but it has made people very defensive. This, at the crux of it, is all about power. It's about who holds power, just as Elaine was saying, who owns the printing presses, who owns the newspapers, who are the editors, who are the commissioners, who are the politicians, you know, and we know that this is at the heart of inequality, that we know that the percentage of privately educated people is around about 7 or 8%, but the percentage of those privately educated people who are MPs, who are top journalists, who are judges, etc., is far, far higher. So, you know, this comes back to power. The way that I like to have conversations with people around this is to look at inequality and to look at a sort of cradle to grave aspect of that. You know, in which areas did you enjoy privilege? In which areas did you not enjoy privilege? And this forms a sort of backdrop for everybody to then be able to take part in the conversation. And it stops the conversation from degenerating into this is about being white and having white privilege, or this is about being posh and having that privilege, or, you know, being Black and being a victim. And it allows us to unpack privilege in a range of different ways, because we all have privilege in different ways. I had the privilege of getting a scholarship to an all-girls independent school. That it conferred immense privilege on me. I'm still Black, I'm still a woman. I will still, you know, have those issues that being Black and being a woman entail. So we have to take a more nuanced approach to this, because it's not just about white privilege, it's about everybody's privilege. But that doesn't mean that I'm you know, not more than happy to call out white privilege where it's being abused and to talk about those issues. I just think we have to have that conversation at a broader level.
Yeah, and it seems to me that this year is the year of talking about privilege, and if we can go a bit further and break that down, I think that'd be a positive thing. But I think we've got a long way to go on that. So we've got a fantastic number of questions now in the Q&A chat box. Question from Charlotte Johnson. Thank you for this forum, timely and appreciated. Given that a lot of aging population are found in churches, what is the role of church leaders, and should a representative church leader be invited on a panel such as this if they were not? Just to add to that, actually, not ironically, the Centre for Aging Better, we've been having various conversations about the role of church and faith, and we are hoping, and sometime in the near future, to have a similar seminar like this, looking at faith and aging. So we haven't forgotten you. With something that we are looking at. We've started this dialogue as well. But Elaine, what's your perspective on the role of church or faith in this conversation that we're having today?
I think it is very, very important that they are included, because a lot of the BME community belong to some faith or other. And faith gives solace, faith helps to give direction. And you know, when you are being battered outside, the only place you can go to is your faith. And if you leave the faith leaders out, who needs to understand also what is happening in the community, coming together, I think they can, they putting their minds together, speaking together, deciding together. I think it will be much better with the faith community, because leave them all out, and that's where majority of the people go. I mean, we are missing the gaps here, I think, if we're having things done separately.
Okay, well, thanks for that contribution, and I think we at the Centre recognise that, and I recognise that. I mean, I've worked with lots of faith leaders over the years. That's something that we're definitely looking at. Van, what about your perspective? What about faith or spirituality? What's your take on that?
Well, as you know, Patrick, I'm an expert in witchcraft, so I may not be the best person to ask.
Yes, that's what I said spirituality.
But joking aside,
yeah.
I see the churches as a powerful force for mobilization where they are doing good. I think there's a flip side to that as well. But what I would say is that, you know, every major religion professes to care about the poor, to care about everybody, to be egalitarian. And I would absolutely love to see those messages reaching out from the church far more than I think they do at the moment.
Okay, we'll leave it at that one. We won't go further. Let's move on because time's running against us. Lynn Livesley. Hi there, Lynn. Former colleague of mine. We used to work together at National Housing Federation. Question from her. Important also to note that women are more likely to report multiple long-term health conditions and high levels of disability than men, and also more likely to care for family members. I think that's something that you both have said already. I don't think anyone wants to add to that or comment on that a bit more. If not, let's move on to next question here. This is from Gula Samband, that the government did not sign up to the Socio-Economic Duty of the Equality Act. Are we now depending on the goodwill of organisations to deliver on this? I think this is a question for you, Vanda.
Well, we are campaigning with Just Fair, as I said, and what we've seen is that there are some local councils who are enacting a version of this. And what we're doing is providing seminars for local councils so that they can explore it more. I think one of the things is that a lot of people didn't realise that this was in the Act and that this was a really potentially transformative lever. So part of our message is to contact local MPs. We'll be doing a briefing in the autumn to make sure that the new MPs know about this, because, you know, if we think about it, this is a crucial part of what the Prime Minister has called his levelling up agenda. So we see no reason why this shouldn't be implemented. So at the moment, it's about raising awareness, but we're also going to be talking to MPs far more about this. And it's something that, you know, you can raise with your local councils as well. The Equality Trust has 20 local groups across the country, and our local groups are campaigning for what we call a Fairness 15, which are 15 actions that local councils can take to make their councils more equal. And this is one of them.
Okay, thanks for that. And that's something I think that, you know, the more of us are aware of that, the more we can work together as well. That's something I'm sure at the centre we can look at ourselves. This question is for you, Elaine. This is from Jeanette, Derbyshire. Elaine's presentation had a list of things communities could do to make positive change. How can white people who are community members make these things happen in locally? So, top tips from you, Elaine, or advice?
First of all, is I keep mentioning it again. It's dialogue. That's the first thing we have to do, and dialogue has to be genuine. You know, because I think I can change my community. My community will respond to me, you know, and if our white colleagues can work with us and go out and try and change their community, I think it will be more powerful, and therefore we can work together. You know, you have, let me give an example. You encourage an older Black lady or an older Black man to go and go to the art gallery, or somewhere, you know, and you go there and the kind of response you get, it doesn't have to be, nothing has to be said, but you could feel it. You wouldn't go back. The reception is poor. So being, all the different nuances, think about it, think about what you do. If you have been doing it for a long time, it's difficult to change, but those changes have to come from the white society to make the older Black people feel welcome in whatever area that they go.
Okay, thanks, John. I just want to extend that question a bit further, because obviously in South Africa, they had, when apartheid came to an end, they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and inquiry. Wendy Williams, who did the report recently on the Windrush scandal, she made a recommendation that the Home Office and officials should listen more to communities about their experiences. What's your take on this dialogue? How can we really make this dialogue really work, and what is required to sustain this dialogue?
Yeah, there has to be some, when we think about the truth and reconciliation, there has to be some difficult experiences. They have to listen to them. You know, when somebody says that they have been discriminated on you, somebody says they go in a shop and they're treated differently. These are things they're telling you, and these are things they have experience. Don't just dismiss it, you know. And I think that's the thing, dismissing how somebody feels, not really believing that that can happen, you know. And once it's dismissed or not believed, just like in hospital, just like anywhere, and that's why my mom was a believer not to go to the hospital, you know.
Okay, well, thanks, sir. Can I just this is a question that's not in the chat, but this is my question. I'll ask that first to Vanda. As you know, as a result of Black Lives Matter, there's been lots of debates within the community, the voluntary sector, and other spaces about the expression, using the word BAME. Is it a community? Is it a nation? Is it superstate? What's your take on this whole perspective on BAME? Should we get rid of the word BAME, or should it be redefined, or what? Or does that simply just reinforce historical stereotypes? Just what's your take on that out of interest?
Well, to be honest, I've always avoided using the word BAME. I've tended to use the word Black and Asian in terms of the political sense of that, in terms of, you know, communities that were colonized. I think the danger of using BAME is that we mask a lot. And so when we're using that in statistics, and we know that, for example, there are many differences in statistics that will look at, for example, white other. You know, I'm part Polish. Do I then become part of BAME on the Polish side because that is a minority ethnic? Am I white on the Polish? You know, are Polish people white? Are they white other? Are they white British? All of these things just within the terminology. And this matters because it matters for the statistics, because the statistics are what the policymakers apparently make their decisions on. So if we are putting high achieving Chinese students along with lower achieving Black students from particular communities, and we're masking all of this, we're not seeing what's happening in those different communities and the differences. And it's a throwaway term, isn't it? You may as well just say non-white, because that's what people mean. So for me, I think it's really quite destructive. And I think coming back to, you know, what Elaine was talking to about lived experience, you know, we've all seen what's happened to the Black barrister, you know, her experience of going into court and constantly being treated as if she's a witness or, you know, she's not a barrister. These are the sorts of things that we deal with every day. I quite liked, was it Gus John's black majority term, but I'm sure that's not going to be one that's going to become adopted. I think the language is absolutely crucial and it's important. And I think one of the things that stops wider debate, and when I do training on these issues, I always start off with looking at the language. What terms do we use to describe protected characteristics? Which ones are contested? Which ones are offensive? Which ones are offensive if you don't know the person? Which ones can you use with a close friend? And opening up that debate unlocks something in people, because a lot of the time people are scared and confused about using the wrong term.
Yeah.
And that's the first hurdle for a lot of people.
That's great. Elaine, have you got a perspective on that? I mean, you know, you've been, when you first arrived to Britain, what was the language used then, and how would you compare that now?
The language used then, it was more open. People said things overtly. Now it is covert, but it has the same feelings, whether it's covert or it's still, if you are the receiving end, it still has the same feeling. Language has not changed. Language has just become covert. That's what I feel. Okay,
that's great. Great. Just looking in what other questions we've got. Time's run out quickly. Question from Paula Knight Davidson. Hi there, Paula. Long time. Are you able to share the slides from your presentation? That's not a problem at all. I'm sure we'll sort that out. We've got about 5 minutes left. And before I kind of wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to add, both Elaine or Vanda, in terms of closing remarks? Elaine, any closing remarks you'd like to make?
My closing remarks remains, that politicians, it comes from the top, and it's time enough, we've spoken enough, there needs to be genuine change. There needs to be responses from politicians to make the right decisions. And the changes need to be, we look forward, it has to be just, it has to be fair, and it has to be immediate.
Okay, that's great. And what about you, Van? What's your closing remarks?
Okay, I would say to everybody, close your eyes. Think of a witch. Okay. Now, I guarantee you that 99% of you will have thought of a woman. In fact, over 26% of those executed in the witchcraft persecution 1500 to 1800 were men. That's the power of stereotypes, and that refers back to the previous question. This is how powerful stereotypes are, and stereotypes mean that when we imagine a CEO, we imagine a white man in a pinstripe suit. When we imagine a doctor or a surgeon, we imagine a man, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think don't underestimate the power of stereotypes. And the other thing is about power. As long as we are all divided, working in our different silos, not thinking about class, not thinking about the economics of this and how we came to be here, which is at the heart of our capitalist system, then we are doomed to failure. So my plea is for us all to work together in the way that Patrick has brought us together, to look at the intersectionality, to factor in the socioeconomic issues, but also to recognize this is about people giving up power. And power is very rarely given up voluntarily.
Oh, well, the other expression is power is taken. Another expression is by any means necessary, but we won't go there right now. So I just wanted to thank both of you for sharing your perspectives and engaging in this conversation. At the Centre for Aging Better, we are on a journey ourselves as an organisation. We have a fantastic team of policy researchers, and we're actually doing more research around work on this area and much more, and we hope to kind of collaborate with other organisations in this space as well, because we believe that as a result of COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, and the ongoing inequalities experienced by Black and Asian minority ethnic communities in Britain, that they're not aging better compared to white counterparts. And we need to think of policy solutions and ideas to try and redress that balance. So I'd like to thank everyone who's online. It's been fantastic. Thank you for everyone's comments in the chat, in the Q&A. Just a reminder again that this webinar will be on demand, and please listen to it while you're having your cocoa or whatever on our YouTube channel. And we have other seminars coming up in the near future as well. So please check out our website and see all the information that we are doing at the Centre for Aging Better as well. So I'd like to thank everyone for participating and enjoy the rest of the day. Normally, when I'm at events, I say safe journey home, but you're probably at home anyway. So safe journey in your armchairs. Thank you very much, everyone.